Welcome back to my podcast. This is the second part of anger, in which I explore whether anger is an emotion, a symptom, a diagnosis, or a way of living. And I also caution, don't ask the DSM. And we begin. In a letter to the editor in psychiatrist.com dated October 15th, 2009, the author, Jin S. Maihi, MD, and pardon me if I mispronounced his name, he writes, quote, "It has been called the chief enemy of public happiness and private peace," close quote. And Dr. Maihi acknowledges that anger is poorly addressed by the DSM, the Diagnostic Bible of the American Psychiatric Association, commonly used by physicians of various stripes, psychologists, social workers, counselors, and lay people. Having been published with increasing analyses of mental illness for over 100 years, the DSM has still not arrived at anything approaching what anger is or how it functions in the human experience. The problem is, as everybody knows, including those who have zero background in psychology, psychiatry, or mental health, the causes of anger are so diffuse that they are not easily reduced to a diagnosis, despite the fact that the emotions and the symptoms are all too familiar. But is anger a way of life, and how does it function? So I threw the problem to Copilot, that is AI, to see what it would tell me about anger and what I thought about its observations. As usual, it gave me a lot of explanation of anger, most of which I thought to be useless, because if you are like me, you want to know the functionality of the expression of anger, how the thing works in the real world, and inside the person experiencing the feeling. Copilot did come up with something, however, that I found provocative, and that, as I will apply here, explains a lot that you won't get from a diagnostic manual. The Diagnostic Manual, after all, is merely offering symptoms leading to a diagnosis without necessarily providing an explanation about how the symptoms themselves work or how they resolve in dysfunction. But what Copilot did say that got my attention was the following, and I quote, "Anger is the mind's response to blocked agency," close quote. Let me explain what that means to me as an old hand at diagnostics who is more interested in function than labels. Like the little baby in the carriage that is depicted in the image accompanying this episode of Psych Survivalist. It is the inability to have impact on our environment in order to meet our needs or even our desires that characterizes the lack of agency. I can't get what I want when I want it, and so I will scream, or I might even become aggressive and demand that you will fill my needs for me. That is what I think of as a lack of agency. This explanation may lead to a diagnosis, but in my opinion, is more explanatory because it tells me how an individual works who is not getting what they want. And as I reflect upon it, I realize that this kind of anger might not occur just in an individual instance, but may be chronic. That is a way to fill all needs without having to do anything except show anger in the form of petulance, even rage. The point is the goal, to get what one wants when one wants it. This is not to say that this is an explanation for all forms of anger, but for a kind of anger that appears to predominate in our society now. So I ask myself, does the President of the United States have agency? The question seems silly, but it can lead to a useful explanation of how decisions are made by the Commander-in-Chief. Just asking this question, I found that I surprised myself because the answer became easy. We are considering the most powerful person on the globe and whether he has agency. Of course he has agency. He has more agency than anyone else on earth. So, what's the problem? Why is he always so dysphoric? Or to put it another way, why is he always in a bad mood? Shouldn't the most powerful person on earth be happy? More than anyone else on earth, he should be someone who is able to get what he wants when he wants it. For some reason, a reason that must be an obvious, he has never been happy and never seems to get what he wants. And thinking about this president in particular, I had to wonder, what is missing? A question that was already answered by Copilot. Despite the fact that this president has more agency than anyone on earth, he nevertheless feels that he lacks agency and never feels he is able to do anything or have anything done for him to his own satisfaction. That is the only explanation that I can see for his constant grumpiness and why, at his most extreme, he will attack anyone who is trying to get him what he wants, but never to his satisfaction. Let me say at this point that, while this may appear to be a political statement, it is really a statement about people as they relate to various forms of mental infirmity. I am tempted at this point to quote the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need. Let's look at this piece of wisdom in another way to see how it applies to our example. For you or me, and indeed for almost everyone, you may not get what you want, but if you're flexible enough and your thinking is open-minded enough to appreciate what is put in front of you, then you can truly say that you get what you need. But if that fulfillment is unanticipated or desired, but that has functionality in the future. But if you're the President of the United States, that is the most powerful person in the free world, if you don't get what you want, you yell even louder and surround yourself with people who would bend over backward to try to fulfill your demands in order to calm you down. What a concept. Agency at the very highest degree. You can have no higher agency than that, although in the end, you'll not learn anything, least of all to adapt or to adjust yourself to circumstances. Distilling this whole argument down, the explanation becomes rather simple. That is, you may have agency in all things, but that doesn't mean that you feel you have agency anywhere. In essence, it's like demanding to fill a bottomless hole. This reflects back on an earlier topic of mine regarding diagnostics. I previously made the claim that what was missing in the Diagnostic Manual, and indeed in almost all psychological research, is an incorporation of the limbic system as it influences our thinking. This could be one of the clearest examples of how the limbic, that is our reptilian brain, thinks one thing, while the cortex, that is the gray matter, is doing something else entirely. Where it concerns the most powerful person in the world, if my interpretation is correct, the cortex is filled with ideas of what is needed for the individual's fulfillment of purpose. But the limbic system is not yet satisfied and may be very dissatisfied, wanting something else entirely. If you are as perverse as I am, then the answer might be that the POTUS thinks he wants a ballroom, a landing pad, a blue reflecting pool, or an Arc de Triomphe. But at his core, in those lower parts of the brain that is associated with lizardry, I just coined a word, he really wants something else, perhaps a warm bottle, perhaps another cheeseburger, or perhaps simply to be loved in a way that he can feel is honest, reliable, and constant, even as that lizard tells him to trust no one. This flaw in personality, if you will, that is the inability to meet one's true needs because of the pursuit of a need that doesn't hit the mark or scratch the itch, can lead to a lot of angry, acting out behavior, as the real need is never fulfilled or even recognized. After 80 years, that need would appear to be covered over by thick pavement, but still has tremendous success in our society, serving as a role model that confuses anger with strength and demands, though lacking in fulfillment as a source of power. Then there is an article that I read in Alternet, dated August 12th, 2026, written by Matthew Rocha, entitled The Dark Psychology Behind Why Trump's Base Finds Joy in Liberal Pain. This article, however brief, is taken from an interview with Dr. Stephen, however he pronounces it, Lewandowski, a cognitive scientist and professor of cognitive science at the University of Bristol, who has written extensively about the psychology behind Trump's movement. From my point of view, it is strange that Dr. Lewandowski quickly arrives at what amounts to another diagnosis that is not to be found in the DSM and, as I have already stated, will provide you with little more than a label and a list of symptoms. This is very similar to what we have observed in the past when Trump was first elected to office and was quickly diagnosed with malignant narcissism. Yet another diagnosis that provides a label, a series of symptoms, but does not lead us to any sense of functionality or how we mere mortals can interact with it. In a broader sense, what is the purpose of this or any other diagnosis, or how does it help us understand or deal with it? As Dr. Lewandowski describes it, this diagnosis is a dark triad of personality, which he explains to be some combination of psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. This is very similar to the symptoms described as malignant narcissism, a term first coined by Dr. Erich Fromm, a social psychologist in 1964, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and described to Hitler and the Nazis themselves. But I'll say again, it's not that these diagnoses are wrong, but it puts us all at a loss for what to do with them. That is what I mean by functionality. If we know how it works, then we know what to do about it. But apparently the nuts and bolts and gears of this kind of pathology does little to inform us how we are to understand it or manage it in our lives. I say we can examine the thinking as it evidences a symptomology, but it doesn't say what's driving it, so we don't know what to do about it. As an aside, I feel compelled to add what the purpose of a diagnostic system is at all, so that we know what psychiatric diagnoses are intended to tell us. For most of us, unfortunately, the labels themselves, that is, the diagnostic labels, are the intended goal. But if you're a clinician dealing with other clinicians, the use of these labels is to provide a common understanding of the symptoms we are confronted with, so that anyone who is knowledgeable enough to engage in the conversation would know what we were talking about. It also allows us to bill for services that we provide. It would be remiss of me not to add that another purpose for the Diagnostic Manual is that once we have taken our diagnostic symptoms to a certain point, that further research might indeed add to the knowledge base that supports the research. But in the end, we are always looking at the same thing, symptoms leading to a diagnosis. What diagnosing doesn't do, however, and never can do, is help us understand the person we are talking about when we attach a label to him or her. I would suggest that in any diagnostic system, physical or mental, there's not a lot you can do about it unless you know how the diagnosis works. That is, how it functions. So let's have a look at these people, dressed in red with Trump signs and big smiles on their faces, while they, quote-unquote, own the libs. As commonly understood by Dr. Lewandowski and Mr. Rocha, these people will never abandon their president, something that is reinforced by the fact that the person at the heart of their movement is the most powerful person in the world and therefore the most knowledgeable. Not that they care. What they do care about is that they can use their beliefs to attack others, people different from themselves who may be intimidated or confused by the attacks that they level at them. To support his thesis, Dr. Lewandowski says that there is testing to support the very symptoms it articulates. That is, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. Someone in the know would want to examine the testing that was used in order to arrive at these diagnoses, But once again, the problem remains that the testing can lead to a label, that the label might describe symptoms, but they do little to tell you how that group of symptoms works to fulfill needs, whether intellectual needs, which are secondary, or primary needs, which go back to the formation of early feelings of childhood. Lewandowski says he can't explain why these people are the way they are, but is quick to label them as being sadistic. Rather, how about we go back to the question of agency? What agency do these people have, and what are they trying to accomplish? Dare I say this goes back to the most frequent question that I used in therapy in the past. That is, what are your goals for therapy or for your life? Lewandowski does recognize that they have a lack of empathy for others and uses, by way of example, their sympathy for Andrew Tate, but not for the women who were victimized by him. Indeed, he sees the primary function here as a lack of empathy in general by these people, but he appears to lack an explanation for why they would be like that. So let me ask what is to me the most pointed question. What do they have empathy for? They clearly have empathy for each other and have a sense of camaraderie surrounding their high regard or even worship of the president. It is this camaraderie that gives them agency as they are reinforced by each other. This camaraderie gives them pleasure, even joy, in the fact that they can get the libs. This is the kind of pleasure that is clearly derived from the reinforcement of being in a group of people who believe the same way you do. But if you separate them, if you talk to them individually about why they think the way they do, they are likely to get defensive or even attacking, because as they interact with others in the world, the basis for their sense of agency is their anger, and they are frequently armed. What they don't expect to get is anger in return because of a belief that the libs have set up an elaborate value system based on empathy that they recognize as cowardice. But Lewandowski asks a further question. Why is it that farmers in the Midwest have little empathy for those people who live on government supports? The answer is very simple, really. That is because the farmers accurately perceive themselves as being productive, while those who require government supports are not productive, at least as far as those farmers are aware, but nevertheless take from the system. Lewandowski acknowledges that these are the very same farmers that take money from the government when it is available, and they need it to continue to support themselves and their families and to produce the food we rely on. What they don't appear to recognize, and yet is an important part of this economic system, is that the very people who are receiving government supports, for whatever limitations they may have, are buying the very food with the government money that is given them, that in the end lands in the pockets of the farmers who are complaining about others receiving support. The only difference is that there's someone in the middle choosing what to buy, choosing what to eat, that may come from the very same farms that are taking money directly from the government because they might be suffering from hard times. This is not just psychology, it is simple economics. The main reason for the food stamp program to begin with was so that farmers would have additional income and that the people who receive those direct supports are in the middle of this transaction through their individual circumstance that causes them to be unable to provide for themselves. If looked at from the point of view of agency, the food stamp recipient has little agency except for how to use the entitlement they are given, whereas the farmer has the knowledge and the ability to recognize how to use their income to increase production so that they can provide for their families, but also for those who are able to benefit from their food production. But both of these groups rely on the government in one way or another, and all agency comes from those empowered to give. Everyone is asking, but only certain people see themselves as entitled to receive. Who is owning who, and who has agency to do anything about it? If your answer is no one, then you understand what I'm suggesting here. The real question is what you can do or need to do about it. The real answer, for me at least, is that knowledge provides agency, and therefore it's learning that would take us out of this system to bring us to a place where we can finally understand how to fulfill our own need. For me at least, this is at the core of what we are doing here, why we are human, and what we expect or can hope to get from the experience.